All right. I hope that you've had a good, another good day. And today we're going to continue with logic, and we'll move out of logic into, we'll move probably tomorrow out of logic into the first substantive consideration, examination of issues related to ethics. So I hope everything is going well for you. Again, just to kind of refresh your memory, I'm holding online office hours from 5 until 6 on Tuesday and Thursday. So if you have a question that you want to ask in person, all you need to do is click onto the Zoom link on the course webpage for my office hours, and I will admit you and try to answer any questions that you might have. And then secondly, we will have the midterm. I believe that's coming up next week around the 5th. I will talk more about that on probably Friday or Monday. And then thirdly, the forum question, the first forum question, we've not yet addressed the material that is covered on the first forum question, but that should happen again on Friday or perhaps even as late as Monday, but probably Friday. Also, if you want to contact me by email, you may do so at my Prairie View email, which is located on the course syllabus. So I think that's kind of the preliminary overview of what we need to consider administratively. So with that in mind, let's move on to a little bit more about logic. And I'm going to pull up the screen here and share that screen with you. One moment. All right, share screen. And then this here, very good. All right, so we've covered this material that I'm flipping through, and I'm going to come to the new material that we're going to address. That begins with this material here. What are the basic steps that you should go through in answering a question on the exam that might just present to you a narrated question that's not broken down in terms of premises, or premise one, premise two, and then conclusion? I might present you just with a statement from someone or a brief quote, and then you are responsible to look to see what the to select what the conclusion of their argument is, what premise one of their argument would be, and what premise two of their argument would be. So the steps in that is, first of all, identify the conclusion of the argument. What is the conclusion of what they're trying to say? Be sure to you've got to know what they're trying to convince you of. That capital punishment is morally correct, or that capital punishment is immoral, or that physician-assisted suicide is ethical, or physician-assisted suicide is not ethical. So what are they trying to convince you of? What's their conclusion? What is their position regarding the issue? Then so you can look at that example that I've listed for you there on the page on your own time, and examine that and see what the conclusion of that article is. Now, again, the conclusion might be the first sentence of the person's statement. The conclusion might be the last sentence of the individual statement. The conclusion might be in the middle of the individual statement. You never know exactly where the conclusion is contained. So don't just think that the first sentence is the conclusion or the last sentence that represents the conclusion. Most students will indeed go to the last sentence and say that is the conclusion. Sometimes it is, and sometimes that's not. So the conclusion of what the author is attempting to convince you of it might be the first sentence, the last sentence, or a sentence in between the first and the last sentence. So just read the pericope or the paragraph and find what is the conclusion. That's the first step. Step two is to identify the premises and the form of the argument. Really, those are two steps, I would think. Identify the premises of the argument, and we've talked a lot about premises. Premise, premise one might be something to the effect of all men are mortal. Premise two might be something to the effect of Socrates is a man. And so the conclusion would be, therefore, Socrates is mortal. So identify the premises of the argument. Premise one is this, premise two is this. I will not be complicated on the exam with regard to having an elaborate number of premises. Probably there'll be premise one, premise two, and then conclusion. So you'll be asked to assess whether it's a valid argument or an invalid argument, or you'll be asked to organize the premises of the person's statement, which constitutes their argument regarding a particular ethical issue. So, so there'll typically be two premises, premise one, premise two, and then conclusion. And then the next thing is look at the form of the argument. That's the third thing I wanted to say. Look at the form of the argument. The form of the argument, all A's are B's, all B's are C's, all A's are therefore C's. So that's kind of that's the layout, the breakdown for the form of the argument. So look back over that material with regard to how to break down into a symbolic representation the form of the argument, and that's going to help you immensely on determining whether the argument is valid or not. If it does not follow that form, A, B, B's or C's, all A's or C's, therefore it is not a valid argument. So you'll be looking at validity. So first of all, identify the conclusion. Secondly, organize the premises of the argument. And thirdly, look at the form of the argument symbolically in order to assess whether or not it is a valid argument. All right, so I'm giving you a number of examples there that you can look through for yourself. I would look at those examples closely because typically those kinds of examples are what I include on the exam. So look at those closely and be aware of those. Let me see. Now that I want to say a third thing about argumentation. In argumentation, I always tell students that we should employ what I call the principle of charity, or really the principle of kindness. Arguments can get very intense and arguments can turn personal. We have strong feelings, we have strong convictions. Maybe if we're criticized, we feel attacked. But argumentation is no basis for us to attack the other person. Remember, to attack the topic or the issue, you're trying to convince the other party to come to your conclusion. So we should always employ the principle of charity. People are going to disagree with us. They're not going to see eye to eye with us on the issues of capital punishment, or on the issue of abortion, or on the issue of physician-assisted suicide. Their story is different from your story. And so their conclusion may be different from your conclusion, or their position may be different from your position. So as a result of that, we don't want to attack someone else just because they disagree with us, or we don't want to think that they are attacking us because they disagree with us. We want to employ the principle of charity and try to really hear what they are saying, what they are arguing, and look at the coherence of their argument. Try to find a hole in that argument and say, well, your argument is flawed, and this is why. Your argument is flawed because blah, blah, blah. So attack their argument, don't attack them personally. So the principle of charity, I've given you some more material there, but that's really all I want to say about that. But I would look over that for the purposes of the exam. Now then, let's move on to the next section, which are logical fallacies. What is a logical fallacy? These are, what is a fallacy? A fallacy is an argument, how do I say this? A fallacy is a flaw, something that we might do that's not really a valid not really a valid logical critique. It's a flaw. It's an error, maybe, and we'll see this playing itself out. Logical fallacies. And we look for logical fallacies in another person's argument. What is the logical fallacy? So let's talk about some of these fallacies. First of all, there's what is called the straw man fallacy. What is the straw man fallacy? The straw man fallacy is oversimplifying or distorting the position, the argument, or belief of someone else in a way that makes it easier to argue against. So, in the straw man fallacy, what you basically do is you hear the other person's argument, but you really kind of deliberately misunderstand what they're saying and overly simplify what they are saying in order to critique what they're saying. So it's called the straw man fallacy. I've given you an example there. President Bush is opposed to stem cell research. He must think that if we succeed in cloning human beings, an army of cloned soldiers will be created to overrun the planet. But this is science. This is science fiction. This is not reality. Hence, stem cell research is perfectly okay. Well, the straw man fallacy in that argument is he must think that if we succeed in cloning human beings, an army of cloned soldiers will be created to overrun the planet. That's not necessarily what President Bush may adhere to because he is opposed to stem cell research. That's reducing his argument to a point of absurdity and deducing or inferring something that he doesn't hold to, which makes makes his position easier to shoot at. That's a straw man fallacy. We in a straw man fallacy, we're construing what the person says in really kind of an absurd and asinine way so as to make it more easily critiqued or undermined by us. So straw man fallacy. And on the exam, you'll be asked to identify what kind of fallacy is this? Is this a straw man fallacy or one of the others? All right, next is the second fallacy to avoid is begging the question. What happens when we beg the question? Well, I'm giving you the definition there. An argument begs the question when it makes use of a premise that no one who didn't already accept the conclusion would believe. All right, so I've given you another elaboration on the definition there. Simply put, an argument begs the question when it reasons in a circle or presupposes the truth of the very thing that it's trying to prove. For example, examples seem to help best with these fallacies. God exists because it says that God exists in the Bible, and everything in the Bible is the true word of God. Well, that's begging the question. It assumes God's existence and it assumes that the Bible is the Word of God from the get-go, begging the question. So begging the question has a lot of assumptive ideas in the critique of a person's argument. And that's seen there. God exists. Why does God exist? Because it says God exists in the Bible, and everything in the Bible is the true Word of God. So that's begging the question really to the point of absurdity once again. Number two, the appeal of ignorance, the appeal to ignorance fallacy. Concluding something is true simply because it hasn't been proven to be false. Just because something has not been proven to be false does not necessarily mean that it is true. Reasoning in such a way is invalid. Something can be true even if no one has succeeded in showing it to be true. For example, no one has even proven that there has ever proven that there is life after death. Therefore, there is no life after death. No one has ever proven that there is life after death. Therefore, there is no life after death. Well, just because you haven't proven that there's no life after death does not mean there's no life after death. It's really an invalid inference, so to speak. You're inferring something that is from the fact that it hasn't been proven or established, and that's not a valid form of argumentation. That's an appeal to ignorance. All right. Number four, the ad hominem fallacy is probably the more easy of all the fallacies. The ad hominem fallacy, I'm giving you a definition of it there, rejecting a position or an argument not in virtue of its logical merits, but rather in virtue of the character, personality, background, motivation of the person giving it. You see this in politics all the time. Politicians are terrible at this. Rather than attacking the argument, they attack the person presenting the argument. That's an ad hominem fallacy. They attack the person's character. You can't believe what they say because they are this, or you can't believe what they say because they did this. You can't believe what they say because they come from this background. That's an attack on the person. That's not an attack on the argument. Um, the third bullet point there on the PowerPoint slide says, who holds a belief, or the person holding a belief typically has nothing to do with the validity of the truth. This is like me saying that a certain party in politics might, you shouldn't believe anything they say because of who they are, because they're slim, because they're Slim Shady, or because they're a hater. You shouldn't believe what they say. Well, no, even Slim Shadys or haters can occasionally present truth. So, politicians that do this, engage in this kind of thing all the time. For example, I'm giving you an example there on the slide. Former President Clinton has argued in favor of increasing restrictions on the sale of guns, but President Clinton is the lecherous, adulterous, untrustworthy, draft dodging old pervert, so his views must surely be misguided. Well, that doesn't attack his argument. That attacks him personally. That's an ad hominem attack. And that's probably the more popular one. You'll see that all the time in the news media, or you'll see that all the time in politics, or you might see it in church, or something to that effect. You might see it in relationships. All right. Let me see. What I call the who's to say fallacy is an instance of ad hominem reasoning. The who's to say fallacy, example, Kant argued that suicide is morally wrong because no one could will it to be a universal law. However, who is Kant to say what people can or cannot will to be a universal law? Well, that's an attack on Kant. That's not an attack upon his argument. So you should know an ad hominem fallacy, the ad hominem fallacy, and know that the who's to say fallacy is a part of the ad hominem fallacy. So that's kind of basically logic. There are a lot of other fallacies that we can talk about, but those are the ones that you'll want to be familiar with and know for the purposes of the examination coming up in here, the midterm examination. So with that in mind, I'm going to move into ethics, the kind of the theory and the background and the context for ethics now. There are three main branches of the philosophical study of ethics, or moral philosophy. Moral philosophy is ethics. That's what some people call it, ethics. Some people call it moral philosophy. That's because ethics is a part of the branch of study called philosophy. So moral philosophy is the study of ethics. There are three areas of ethics. There are meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. And you'll want to know the definitions of those things. What is meta-ethics? Meta-ethics consists in the attempt to answer the fundamental philosophical questions about the nature of ethical theory itself. So we're going to engage in meta-ethical study when we start looking at the theories. Meta just means above, really, above ethics. It's not applied, it's not practical ethics. Meta really is kind of theoretical ethics. We're going to talk about ethical theories such as consequentialism. We're going to talk about ethical theories such as non-consequentialism. We're going to talk about Nietzsche's ethics and his theory. We're going to talk about the will to power, which emerges from Nietzsche. And deep ecology ethics. We'll look at the theoretical positions that individuals hold to with regard to ethical theory. So that's meta-ethics. Meta-ethics deals with more of the theoretical concepts. Let me see. Next, regarding meta-ethics, meta-ethics assumes that there are truths. Assumes that if we assume there are truths of morality, then we must ask what type of facts make them true. Now, subjectivism and objectivism come to the fore at this point. Subjectivism means I determine what is right and wrong for myself, that there is no universal absolute standard of right and wrong out there for everyone to live by, but ethics varies from the individual to the individual. So I subjectively, I personally, I in my own way determine what is right and wrong for me. And so that's subjectivism. There is no absolute truth. But objectivism stands in contradistinction to subjectivism. Objectivism says that ethical truth is objective. It's not contingent upon the individual, it's not contingent upon you. But ethical truth and ethical standards are objective standards. So, as a result, objectivism advocates that there are absolute rights and wrongs for all people to endorse and all people to avoid, regardless of where they are and regardless of who they are. So subjectivism and objectivism stand in contradistinction to one another. Subjectivism says there is no absolute truth. Objectivism says there is absolute truth. Subjectivism says that I determine my own standards of right and wrong. Objectivism says, no, there's a universal standard of right and wrong. An example of subjectivism would be moral relativism. Moral relativism says this, that morality is relative. It varies from individual to individual. This is what's happening whenever in moral relativism, someone says, well, I believe this is right and this is right for me, but it might not be wrong for you. Or that might be wrong for you, but it's not wrong for me. So that's subjectivism. When someone says, well, there is no universal standard of right and wrong that applies to all people. I have my own standard and you have your standards, and we'll both just agree to disagree. That's moral subjectivism. However, if someone says, well, there is an absolute universal standard of right and wrong that applies to all people of all ages, for example, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not bear false witness. Those laws, some religious folks would say, apply to all people of all ages and all eras. That's moral objectivism. That says there's an objective universal standard of right and wrong that applies to everyone, and that everyone is to allow to direct their lives. So that illustrates the difference between subjectivism and objectivism. So you'll need to know what subjectivism is and objectivism is. All right. So let me see. Normative ethics versus applied ethics. That's the second area. Normative ethics. Normative ethics, what studies what features make an action right or wrong. Normative ethics studies what features makes an action right and wrong, all right, right or wrong. Normative ethics typically uses the word must or should, or that's really prescriptive ethics, but it's a form of normative ethics. This abortion is wrong because, someone might say, it is the taking of a human life. Or abortion is wrong because it is expensive to the society. Or abortion is wrong because God says, thou shalt not kill in the 10 Commandments. Well, my electricity went off here. I don't know if this is continuing or not. We were on a roll. I think it's continuing. I'm going to go ahead and continue on. One moment. Let me see if I can see what happened here. Hey, Mom, I think I flipped the switch out here. My lights went off. Will you hit the button out there, or is it in here? See if there's a breaker thrown. Okay, we're going to get that fixed. So normative ethics deals with why abortion might be right or wrong, or why capital punishment might be right or wrong, or the bases upon which capital punishment might be determined to be right or wrong. What are the norms or the standards by which we determine that an act is right or wrong? Ma'am?
It's in there. Wanting over this area.
No, it's not gonna work.
What the heck? I'll get it.
The fuck? Oh, it's been a breaker.
All right, I'm sorry for that interruption, but normative ethics deals with the bases upon which an ethical action is considered to be right or wrong. So you have medical ethics, which is more the theoretical basis for ethics. Then you have normative ethics, which is the determination of the bases upon which we make a decision that a certain action is morally right or morally wrong. And then you have applied ethics, which is the third area. Applied ethics deals with simply applying theory to practical issues, such as capital punishment, such as animal welfare or animal rights, such as abortion or civil rights or human rights or those kinds of things. So applied ethics is exactly what it says it is. It's applying ethical theory to actual ethical dilemmas. So those are the three big areas: meta ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. So next we will move into other aspects of normative ethics that are addressed there in those slides that explains those. I'm sorry, that interruption kind of disrupted me. The rest of the slides go into discussing exactly why, what normative ethics are and what applied ethics are and what meta ethics are. But based on what I have said, you should be able to assess those and understand those slides on your own. So let me see, that's pretty well all we want to cover with regard to that logic and the various areas of ethics and the fallacies. So what we will do tomorrow is we will move into a discussion more of the history of ethics and move into Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Probably tomorrow we will address Socrates, and then on Friday we will address Plato, and then on Monday we will address Aristotle. We may be able to address both Plato and Aristotle tomorrow on Friday, but chances are that's what we will do. Anyhow, I hope you're keeping up in the class. Send me an email if you have any question. These asynchronous classes are challenging because we don't have much interaction with one another personally. So let me know if you are having a struggle, or if you have a question, or if you have a difficulty with the material. But I always try to remind students that I will not reopen forums, I will not reopen quizzes, and those kinds of things. So if you have any questions about those things, look at the syllabus or send me an email or check into my office at my office hours on Tuesday and Thursday from from 5 until 6. All right, sorry for that interruption that threw off my rhythm, but you should be able to look at those slides, print those slides out and have them in front of you. That's perfectly fine when you take the exam. If you want to use those slides when you're taking the exam, you can do that. The problem is you'll get so bogged down in looking for the material in the slides, perhaps, that you run out of time. So you don't want that to happen. But it's perfectly permissible for you to have the slides in front of you. I don't mind that. This is a unique situation and a unique circumstance. The goal is for you to learn. And if that helps you to do that, fine. But don't just go cold turkey with regard to the slides and the exam. Okay, enough said. I hope you guys are great. I wish we were on campus so I could meet you face to face, but stay in touch with me and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.